Can they fix it? Well, look at these numbers for President Biden when it comes to his re-election bid. An Axios headline sums it up: Trump set to romp Biden. A new national poll shows President Biden is trailing former President Trump in all but one key battleground state, and Trump leads in 5 states. Biden only up in Wisconsin by a couple of points. And if you look down below, that's really just a hair outside the margin of error, 1.8. The president is facing overwhelming concern over his ability to carry out a second term. 71% of voters say he's too old to be an effective president. Even worse, a majority within his own Democrat Party agree with that. A Wall Street Journal editorial titled "A 5-Alarm Biden Re-Election Fire." Power panel now: Mark Penn, Stagwell CEO, former Clinton advisor, and polling expert. David Avella, GOPAC chairman. Gentlemen, great to see you. David, I'm going to start with you. Too early to probably plan for a different candidate, do you think, this across the aisle?
Well, certainly President Obama is casting his vote, and the fact that David Axelrod came out this weekend and said what he did, we know President Obama wants someone else as the Democratic Party nominee. And you add to what even the president said this weekend, undercutting his own vice president, now President Biden's own foreign policy with what has been said. All of that to say, Harris, the biggest challenge for the President Biden is Americans believe life is harder, and it's his policies that have made it that way. That purchasing power is down. That $100 gallon of gas is now $160 because of inflation under Biden. That $120 gasoline bill is now up 20%. That food bill is now up to $126, over $100. Life is harder under Biden, and Americans know it.
You mentioned the former Obama senior advisor, David Axelrod, is now questioning Biden's re-election. I want to show everybody what he posted on social media. Here it is. Only Joe Biden can make this decision. If he continues to run, he will be the nominee of the Democratic Party. What he needs to decide is whether that is wise, whether it's in his best interest or the country's. Mark, that's harsh. Is he right?
Look, I was pretty surprised by that post. I think he's right. If Joe Biden continues to run, he is the nominee, and only he can make the decision whether or not he wants to make a Lyndon Johnson type decision, given the world situation. He's going to devote his time to that instead of electioneering. There's no real sign of that. However, I would say he is, despite these numbers, I think they're looking at, can they improve the economy? Can they close the border? Look, he's going to have to do things to raise these numbers, or it's going to be a really tough.
169 people on the terror watch list known to have come into the United States, not just under his watch, but in the last fiscal year. And all of that with the backdrop of 2 wars. Russia going to war against Ukraine, and now Israel having to fight back terrorists and hunt them down after they hunted their citizens. Hamas terrorists. Key voting groups that backed Biden by a landslide in 2020 are now peeling back their support. This is perhaps the biggest sign of a fire in the fire in the hole, really. Biden is leading among young voters by only 1 percentage point, which means if any of them just sits this one out, he's in trouble. Women still favor Biden by a slimmer margin. Men prefer Trump by double that. Those numbers reverse the gender advantage that has historically fueled Democratic victories. Biden's lead in urban areas is half of Trump's edge in rural regions. Biden's lead among Hispanic voters is down to single digits. 22% of black voters are now backing Trump. That's a level unseen for a GOP presidential candidate in modern times. David.
And this is why the talk of third-party candidates is particularly detrimental to President Biden, especially if he gets into the battleground states of Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and Arizona and Georgia, that it becomes much harder. The path for Biden becomes much more narrow. He can't lose any of those states and still get reelected. And you made an excellent point about the border, Harris, and in that as national security becomes more of a concern for voters, until Americans believe their nation is secure, that we know who's coming into this country, you add that to the inflation problems that Biden has already caused, and it's a real tough path for Joe Biden.
All right, we got to go real quick here, Mark Penn. If not Biden, then who?
Well, look, there are a number of governors out there who are in the wings and who would be very effective candidates if Biden should make a decision here. You know that it's in California, Illinois, elsewhere.
What about the vice president, Kamala Harris? I thought she was, like a bridesmaid. Like you wait until the bride sits down, or in this case, the groom.
Well, she would start out with something of an advantage, but, I think she'd have a tough contest against a group of governors here as well. There would be a wide open contest, but that window is closing. Right. It's closing right now.
It makes more sense what Dean Phillips did on the left to jump in when he did, perhaps. We'll be watching all of it. Great to have you both. David, Mark, thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, everyone. I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.